So good morning, or whatever it is at this time. When you started at 6, what was it, Tina? You started at 6 at a
I have
session?
never been to a conference that starts at 6 a.m. like this one.
With full rooms. So on behalf of Women Deliver, I am delighted and honored to be on a stage with Tina, with Vanina, and with Albi. You know, 3 marvelous women who are leading movements and who are using their power for good and who inspire me every day. It's great to see everyone on the same stage here and on the same page. We are part of movements, part of a bigger movement with a common goal of a just world where gender rights, justice and equality are the norm. We will not be defined or divided by our differences, but they will make us stronger. And we have all, kind of represented voices historically that has been voiceless. But that's just not enough, because what we see happening now is that the voices from everywhere are lifting, and getting them together here and online is just a joint and very common strength that really fuels the movements and movement. We all bring our knowledge, expertise, and experience and lived experiences, and together we are moving towards a world that is more equal for all of us. In a gender equal world, everybody wins. A gender equal world is healthier, it's wealthier, it's more productive, and it's more peaceful. And there are so many interlinked issues that we need to address to get there. And we can't fight issue by issue. We have to stand united. A bedrock is, of course, and we all agree on that, the ability to decide on our own bodies. That's a bedrock. We decide when, with whom, how, and we make our reproductive choices. But we need this real collaboration and real co-creation for the way forward, because what we can come up with together is so much stronger and better than we can dream alone. So let's value each other's unique experiences and differences, and let's learn from each other, even when the lessons are hard learned. And I think that was one of the beautiful things in the plenary, that you're sitting in front of strong women, but you are not sitting in front of, we're whole women with the weaknesses and the strength and everything. And we work together, even if it takes longer. And we move lock stock towards the better future and gender equal world. I don't have to ask these women how they use their power, because they're already changing the world. But I will ask, what will you do next with your power and the power of your movement? So first, I'll give the mic to Tina. Chen is the co-founder of Time's Up Legal Defense Fund, an organization for safe, fair, and dignified work for women of all kinds. And she has just recently launched the new inclusive advisory habits.
Yes, thank you. Well, thank you, Katja, for that, for so many things, and for both Women Deliver, which has been an amazing conference of women from around the world, from all different movements, which was represented on the stage this morning so fantastically. And I think the message that you just gave, and what was the theme of this morning, is that working together. That piece that I think I said on the stage, that one of the history of the women's movement, unfortunately, has been we're very fragmented, and we are where we are today because we are quite fragmented, with many groups, although working in the same space, not talking to each other, and then not seeing the commonality across spaces. I was so glad, for example, that you had environmental justice on the stage today, because we often forget about that as feminists, and we women and children are the most vulnerable. And, at the same time, if women's leadership is asserted in the green movement, we actually know that we're going to have more success, as we know we do when we empower women on so many issues around the world. So Time's Up, we were really proud to be included. We're kind of young, if you think about it, really only launched on January 1 of 2018, but has really taken off with a velocity that none of us, I think, fully expected in the wake of the Harvey Weinstein articles that appeared in the fall of 2017, and really started in Hollywood by the women of Hollywood who, as victims of Harvey Weinstein, took great courage. And those of you in the media know, it can be a career-limiting move to talk about these issues if you're an actor or actress in Hollywood. And yet those women did courageously speak. That was the theme from this morning too, about the power of your individual voice and your individual story. But most particularly, not only did they speak out for themselves, but Time's Up itself was always born out of a dedication to making sure that these women who recognized they had privilege and a platform that was unique decided to use that privilege and platform not just to change Hollywood and their own working conditions, but were very committed to making sure that low-income women in industries that are often overlooked, like farm workers and hotel staff and fast food workers, were represented. And that was really the motivation behind the Time's Up Legal Defense Fund, which is the first, major initiative of Time's Up that was also launched on January 1 of 2018. It's housed at the National Women's Law Center, which is a 45-year-old women's civil rights organization in D.C. We have to date raised over $24 million from all 50 states and 60 countries, I believe. It is a place where anyone who's been a victim of workplace sexual harassment can call to get assistance. We've had, since January 1 of 2018, over 5,000 people from over 60 different industries call us for assistance. I'm happy to report that we have nearly 800 lawyers across the United States who are volunteering their services or offering them at low cost rates. The funds are being used to help support some of those cases that don't have sufficient funds to proceed. And you may have seen we just launched the Time's Up Legal Defense Fund is funding a new class action against the FBI that was just announced last week on behalf of women FBI agents who allege sort of rampant gender sex discrimination occurring at the training facility at Quantico. So this is happening everywhere. We know it happens in all kinds of workplaces. It happens to partners in large law firms, which is my profession, down to the frontline workers at a Ford plant, or fast food workers, in small restaurants and roadside inns. This is someplace that happens everywhere and has long been silenced and not talked about, because people didn't feel they had a voice, didn't have access to legal services, didn't have protection from getting retaliated against. I'm also grateful to see one of the things Time's Up has been active in is also a lot of the movements in states and cities in the United States to change laws, to elevate our laws. Our laws have not kept up with the kinds of protections that we need. And I think that's a movement that's, igniting around the world as well. So that, well, how am I going to use my power to your question, Katja? Sorry. My power to change is to keep doing that. I mean, one of the things that I also do, not through Time's Up also, but my law firm practice at Buckley and my new consultancy, which is a training business called Habit, is to help companies, reform themselves. And many, many companies and CEOs understand this now and get it and want to build a better workplace culture. They understand that it is not only a good risk mitigation strategy for themselves, but it is something that they need to do in a tight labor market. This is what they need to do to attract the best talent, to make sure that their values that they live out in their workplace are consistent with what they're telling their consumers, and their customers, they want to live out. We know that many millennial customers are very discerning in the values that they want to see their companies that they're buying goods and services from exhibit. And so we have an opportunity here. I mean, the power piece is that we have a real opportunity to make some real change in workplaces today. Thank you.
Thanks for doing that, Tina. And Vanya Escal, Escales. You're one of the founders of Ni Una Menos, a movement that brings gender-based violence into the public consciousness in very new ways, but also all the way into the policy debates. So how are you going to use your power?
Voy a hablar en español, por si quieren usar sus audífonos, sus auriculares. En este momento creo que lo siguiente que podemos hacer en la Argentina, o lo que a mí me gustaría hacer en la Argentina, es que nuestra agenda de derechos de derechos de las mujeres lesbianas, travestis, trans, de los derechos entren en la discusión de las próximas elecciones a presidente. En la Argentina en octubre habrá elecciones para cargos nacionales y me parece que nuestros temas, que no pueden darse debates sin nosotras. Nosotras tenemos que estar.
I can understand Spanish.
Okay. No pueden darse campañas a elecciones sin nosotras. Nuestros derechos tienen que estar. Ni una menos, además de ser un movimiento que busca un cambio cultural, trata de insertar los derechos de las mujeres dentro de los derechos humanos, hacer que eso sea entendible. Entonces, en tanto es un movimiento que pelea por sus derechos, reclama al Estado el goce y el acceso a esos derechos. No es un movimiento autonomista que busca que nos deje aisladas con nuestras propias reglas. Nosotras demandamos que el Estado dé respuestas. Demandamos políticas públicas, reclamamos que haya un registro de femicidios unificado, reclamamos que haya patrocinio jurídico gratuito para las víctimas de violencia machista, reclamamos que haya educación sexual integral en todas las escuelas y que se cumplan. La Argentina tiene leyes muy progresistas o muy de avanzada, pero no siempre se cumplen. Y al mismo tiempo, el año pasado, por primera vez, llegó al Congreso el tratamiento por el derecho al aborto legal, así que también necesitamos que nuestra agenda por el derecho a nuestra autonomía y por el derecho a decidir sobre nuestros cuerpos, sobre nuestras biografías, esté también en el debate presidencial. So, well,
Yeah.
es eso.
Yeah. And Olivia,
Your turn.
I think you all heard it in there. You are, there's legends on this table, but you go furthest back, and you have campaigned, in all the Irish abortion campaigns and referendums, and you pushed it this time.
Yes, we did. After 35 years and 6 referendums, we finally won. People sometimes say Ireland changed very quickly, and I think, no, it didn't. You see before you a broken woman, and many of us actually doing it. But I think what has been very, very interesting in Ireland is that we have very obviously and very explicitly kind of bucked a trend which obviously obtains in the US, but also to a very large extent now, in a creeping extent elsewhere in the world, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in South America, whether it's in India, wherever, of extreme right-wing forces or forces of reaction are taking hold. Although I would point out that the recent European Parliament elections, the extreme right and forces of reaction did not gain the foothold that they had expected to. So I do think that we should be very careful not to read every part of the world in absolutely identical ways. Mm-hmm. That being said, I think Ireland was very unusual because it was quite unexpected for us to win a constitutional right to marriage for lesbian and gay people in 2015. by something like 62% in a constitutional referendum. I think it's the only referendum that's actually been held on that issue. And I had the honour of being, and the privilege really, of being very centrally involved in that campaign. But in the meantime, we had, on a parallel line, really decided after the death of a young Indian woman in Ireland who was refused a termination during an actual miscarriage, Savita Halappanavar, in 2012, some of us had come together to say what we need to do in Ireland in relation to abortion, which had been prohibited at that time for nearly 35 years, and more, going way back, but was in the Constitution since 1983, that what we needed to do was to reframe the narrative, to reset the agenda and the terms of the debate, and that we would seize the initiative on the issue and go out and demand a referendum, that a referendum be held again. And that required a deep breath, because when you're moving into your 6th referendum on abortion, you feel this is a very risky thing to do, it's a gamble, but we do have to do it. This was back in 2012, before we'd even won marriage equality. But we did take that deep breath and say that we need to do this now, and we need to control this debate. We need to define what the terrain is of this ongoing battle around abortion, pretty well world over, you can say, where, okay, there are different battles where in one place it's about defending and protecting the rights that women have already gained, and in other parts of the world, like Argentina and like Ireland and elsewhere, it was about seeking to gain and to expand rights. But we did do that, and we decided that 2 of the really key things we had to do were, number one, was to build a really strong, absolutely cross-sectoral, broad-based coalition. So it had to go beyond pro-choice and feminist organisations and groups, which those of us who were starting this were involved in, that this was an issue which affected the country as a whole. So it was about bringing people together. And that was quite difficult, because there is a tendency on the political left throughout the world to be very fragmented. So it's a very noted tendency everywhere. I'm being highly ironic here. So it was actually about building bridges between different parts of the radical and progressive and liberal political institutions and environments and parties and so on and so forth, but also bringing in the trade union movement, also bringing in students, also bringing in all of the NGOs that we could possibly think of and name. So starting off from a base of 12 organisations in our coalition, which was called Repeal of the 8th Amendment.
I'm going to interrupt you a little bit.
Yes,
Because
sorry.
how are you going to use the power of that movement now moving forward?
Oh yes, absolutely. But just to say that the power of coalition building itself is really important. And then thinking very clearly about how you are going to talk to your voters, your electorate, your people who you have to persuade. And that coalition building gave us great strength and great spread and great networking. And that's what I think I will be going on doing in various movements. And also understanding that what we need to do in perhaps pro-choice movement broadly, sometimes we need to listen more than we talk. Sometimes we need to say to those that we're addressing, what are your reservations? What are your fears? What are your difficulties? Let's have a conversation about this. So instead of having 2 ideologically fixed points opposite to one another, that we actually find ways of creating conversations with those who are willing to have them with us. And I will be doing that in relation to abortion as it continues in Ireland. It will be about services for women. The north of Ireland, that tiny little part of the top of our tiny little island, which still prohibits abortion. I'll be fighting for that, and elsewhere in Europe, defending the rights of women in Poland, trying to gain rights for women in Malta, thinking about what's happening in Hungary. So looking in that European context, and also trying to bring that sense of how we can redefine. I wouldn't dream of seeking to tell anything to Argentina or fighting an absolutely wonderful battle, but wherever there is space for that story to be. Why? Because it is about a fundamental freedom. And my job as an activist, a lesbian, feminist, socialist activist, is always to fight for the freedom of those who are marginalized, oppressed. And I commit to doing that, but in unity and solidarity. And I felt here at this brilliant conference, you can feel that solidarity, you can feel that understanding, you can feel those connections being made. It's really difficult to do, isn't it? But we absolutely know how to do it from so many parts of our global movement. So I am definitely committing to going on doing that in the future. And
Thank
hoping
you.
that the stamina will continue.
Thank you. And we'll open up for some questions. We'll take 3 questions at a time. And if you would start by saying your name and your outlet, and then the question and who it is directed to. Thank you.
Hi, I don't know if I'm rude if I have 3 questions at once, but I'm just going to shoot because we're not totally crowded here. My name is Julia Wicklander, and I run a global media organization called Girls Globe. And thank you so much for an incredible panel. I feel very inspired. I have 3 questions. I'm going to try to be brief here, but how do we create movements that focus on positive action when many, many, many people are so angry? And what can we do as the international and global community to create solidarity for these movements and really, be there and support these movements when we also see such polarization in politics? I'm from Sweden, and yeah, there's a lot of polarization there as well, and a big right-wing movement growing. My last question is, how are your movements, and here I may be thinking about Ni Una Menos and also the abortion movement in Ireland, how are your movements caring for those who are standing up in vulnerability and sharing their stories, sometimes also exploiting their trauma to the world? What are your thoughts on moving beyond sharing those personal stories and actually taking action? I would, love to hear about that.
Thank you.
¿Puedo comenzar?
Sí.
En la Argentina lo que pasó después de ese 3 de junio de 2015 fue que comenzaron a organizarse en pequeños grupos y comunidades las mujeres. Entonces, la contención, el acompañamiento y la necesaria acción de escuchar historias y de acompañarse, comenzó a darse como de forma autoorganizada en pequeños grupos. Al mismo tiempo me parece que no hay que caer en la polarización. La polarización siempre perdemos. Por eso recién cuando escuchaba a mi compañera hablar de que hay que escuchar al otro, escuchar cuáles son las resistencias, cuáles son las negativas, me parece que muchas veces están basadas en temores o en la idea de que somos amenazantes para ciertos órdenes culturales, ¿no? Por eso me parece que no hay que tensionar y no hay que entrar en esos juegos de polarización, porque perdemos no solo nosotras, perdemos todos en términos de derechos. Quien pierde es la sociedad. Me parece que en ese sentido hay que enmarcar nuestras luchas como no solo nuestras, son luchas que hacen mejores nuestras vidas, las vidas de todos, hacen mejores a la sociedad. Entonces, me parece que no hay que tensionar eso, sino pensar, darle un marco un poco mayor al de esas tensiones.
I'm sorry, I can't follow everything that you're saying. I caught parts of it, Vanina. Shall I just go now?
Yes,
okay. Just on the question of anger first, I mean, certainly in my own experience, you don't start by speaking with the people who are most angry. And I think perhaps the first thing that I'm very conscious that I have to do is to in a way, divest myself of my own anger, because I am also angry about what happens to women. But I'm also aware that if I want to have a conversation where I'm going to be believed and trusted and so on and so forth, that I have to be able to do this very calmly and very rationally. And it's something that we certainly tried very hard to do in our campaign. Very difficult with social media to achieve that now. So there are questions of discipline and control there in any big campaign that are problematic. But it does seem to me that when we're looking at anti-abortion, pro-choice movements, and it's a really tough thing for me to say as a pro-choicer of very long standing, that in a way you have to move off the ideologically fixed positions and try to see the issue from the perspective and the point of view of those who are not so ideologically opposed, but who just simply feel really uncomfortable about abortion, who just have that kind of emotional problem and possibly a moral one, and to shift that conversation onto different grounds. But I really don't think you can deal with people who are themselves very angry. So that is a problem in countries where there is very strong polarization, which is why one template doesn't fit all. In the US, you have 50-50 more or less polarization. That's not the case necessarily in European countries where coalitional approaches, whether it's in Sweden or wherever, to politics. So it works in those situations. How it works in the US is yet to be seen. On how we support other movements, which I think was your second question, if I'm not mistaken, Julia, I think, there, social media is certainly a hugely valuable tool for us. It can be a problem, but it is a hugely valuable connecting tool, because the more we connect and communicate and inform and exchange what we're doing in our different movements, connected movements, the better able we are to form international blocks. And I think you can see the value of that at a meeting of this kind. So I'm already, like very many people here, thinking ahead, for example, to Nairobi in November, where many of the same people will also be present, and thinking ahead of that again to Beijing 25 and so on and so forth, that these meetings are really important, where we get down one-to-one and talk about the differences. And your third point then about women having to speak about their experiences. This is a huge issue. I completely agree with you. There are big ethical problems. This is not something, these are very personal experiences that really nobody should be obliged or ever feel obliged to speak about in public. Nonetheless, I think we do know that when people hear about those experiences, they have an understanding and an empathy with the people who've gone through, who are telling those stories. So it is about always setting ethical guidelines, certainly in campaigning mode, and of preparing people who are telling stories for doing that in a public way, making sure that that's absolutely something that they're ready to do. And also, I think, supporting them afterwards, because it can be cathartic to tell your story, but it's also very, very, very emotional. So we now have kind of protocols around that, which I think are very important. But I do want to say that I started off thinking we can't exploit women by saying you've got to get out there and tell your stories. But I also have to acknowledge that certainly in our campaign and in marriage equality, that it was those testimonials from people that really changed people's hearts. People don't vote up there, they vote in here, in their hearts. And it was those human experiences that made the complicated reality of human life so visible. It's not a yes or no, right or wrong situation. It's a complicated, certainly abortion, sexuality. These are just complex human experiences and realities. So talking about them is really important, but always with boundaries.
Well, I will just say briefly, I think you have to, this is an old political, adage, you actually have to stand for something as opposed to just against something. It's really insufficient to just simply be against something. So using Time's Up as an example, yes, we're against sexual harassment, but what we're really for and trying to build, right, are safe, respectful, dignified workplaces for everyone. And that's important in a political context. And to Alba's point, actually in the United States, it's not 50-50. It's a third, a third, a third. No, the conventional, and this is sort of held through multiple election cycles, that where the American Republic is a third on the right, a third on the left, and a third in the middle. And elections are won and lost in the middle. Because there remains this sort of third, and it kind of moves around between, 30% and 35 or 40% of people who are, don't identify with any particular party, aren't ideologically bound in a particular way, are voting on their own issues, whether it was economics, at one point, or sometimes it's social issues. And that's where creating a narrative about what is the vision that you're trying to create in our country, what do you stand for on the positive side, it becomes really critical, and that's the battlefield where elections are won and lost.
I stand corrected, and thank you. And it's absolutely right, of course, because we aim straight at the middle ground.
Right.
And we would also be talking, perhaps not quite 30-30-30, but to a very similar kind of situation.
Right.
What we also see, just before taking more questions, is fear is often a bigger driver than hope. So what we see, but what you can do as a movement with hope is that you can take the dream and you can make it doable by going to it strategically, by going to it with a marketing analysis, like what you actually just did,
Right.
and then put it down to steps and bring on the right partners.
Right.
Then suddenly you don't have hope, but you have a doable dream, and that beats fear.
Yeah.
A couple of questions? Yes, we have one here. There's a, yep.
I'm a journalist from Bangladesh. My name is Hasib from bdnews24.com. So as I will be going home in the evening, so what message I should take for my policymakers or for my readers from this conference, and what's next?
Another question?
What's next? Message for leaders.
Thank you so much. My name is Lungelo Ndlovu from Zimbabwe, with a feed. My question is, I wanted to find out how you are dealing with perception of male pull-head-down syndrome, both male and female pull-head-down syndrome perception, considering that this phenomenon is kind of huge in Africa. I don't know whether you're understanding what I'm saying. Trying to say.
Can you say it again?
Pull-head-down syndrome.
Pull you down?
Pull-head-down
Pulling
syndrome.
it down?
Yeah.
So,
In terms of maybe political representation of women, less representation of women in political spaces, or maybe relating to gender-based violence, where women want to speak out their issues and they are trolled online.
yeah, the trolling, yes.
Yep.
That's a big one.
Hi, my name is Teresa Nicasio. I'm a host of a radio show that has global reach, and I'm also a psychologist, and so I'm very interested in kind of from a psychological perspective, and that with my show I elevate voices like yours and try to get the education out, but in a way that's not polarizing as much as possible, but informative and compassion, empathy-based. So given your experiences and your incredible wisdom, I'm wondering what you would recommend to someone like myself or other journalists here how to communicate this global gag order because of the complexities of how the tentacles apply, because there's the one level of the abortion element, but then the many ripple effects of the other health implications and emotional implications for so many women.
Thank you. So we had, what's next? And the key message to take home from here and from this panel. Then we have the trolling, pull her down, the trolling. And then we had how to communicate something very complex like the global gag room.
I want to answer what's next. in Spanish, sorry.
It's good. It's channel 1.
It's just not getting it.
Are you ready, my
Yep.
friend? No?
If you say something, he
go
starts
ahead.
translating.
Go
¿Me
ahead.
escuchás?
Yes. Okay.
¿Escuchás la traducción?
No.
Well,
No?
first when you say something, then there's translation.
Ok,
Yes.
bueno. Me parece que ¿qué es lo que viene después? Tenemos que pensar que el mundo no es más naciones separadas. Tenemos que pensar de manera transnacional los problemas. Tenemos además que reclamar compromisos serios con la lucha por los derechos de las mujeres y las diversidades. Cuando en la Argentina peleamos todavía por el aborto legal, necesitamos el acompañamiento y el compromiso no solo de otras organizaciones del mundo, sino también de otros gobiernos que dicen estar comprometidos con el goce de los derechos humanos. Entonces, en esa configuración, me parece que podemos trabajar juntas. En Canadá hay un alto estándar de acceso a derechos y el presidente Trudeau habló a favor de ellos. Lo necesitamos en la Argentina, apoyando nuestras luchas y hablando directamente con nuestros presidentes. Hay una cuestión de injerencias en las políticas internas de otros, pero creo que tenemos que pensar que el mundo no es más países aislados. Entonces creo que lo que viene después es trabajar juntas.
Great.
So if I can, the one a message I think I would take to policymakers at home in your countries is something that did not come up on the panel, but has come up elsewhere in other sessions here at Women Deliver, and that is the fact that if you address these issues of gender discrimination, if you get the girls in your country educated through 12 years of education and get them economically empowered, that is the greatest key to unlocking the economic success and political success of your country. You know, the McKinsey report shows us that it's, 12 to $28 trillion, right, of economic growth that can occur in the next decade, if we unlock the potential of women's economic power. We know from the World Bank and others that if you give girls 12 years of education, then you will reduce the health costs because their families are healthier. You will increase your entire GDP, not just the wealth of that individual family. And you will have more peace and security because we know that when women are educated and women become leaders, that there is more peace and security. And I always say when I talk about adolescent education, there is a reason the Boko Haram, and the Taliban went after girls getting educated. They know. Right? The people who want to disrupt, the terrorists, know that the quickest way to disrupt and create an insecure situation in countries and communities is to keep women uneducated and to suppress them with gender-based violence. And so that's the message I think I would send to policymakers around the world, that is the answer to addressing so many of our global development issues is pretty clear. It's to eliminate gender discrimination and empower women and girls.
Well, I had sort of written down some words there, and it was quite simply, seeking to eliminate poverty and extreme poverty, the importance of education, as Tina has said, and health, and of course, very much the emphasis for girls and women on the importance of economic independence and actually the right and the possibility and access to work, and also political representation, which is similarly very, very, very important, and which is almost nowhere, not entirely, but almost nowhere, anywhere near adequate. So I think that those are the kinds of messages that have been going out for decades and decades to world leaders, but we have to keep putting them out again and again and again, because it is about a principle of justice. So if there is a commitment to justice and equality, then these are the very obvious things that need to be done. But we have to keep going back to that. And I think alongside that, and it is a bit of what's next, you know, there is that sense that our movements do challenge what you might call the geopolitics of the world. We do challenge neoliberal capitalism, and we say that it actually keeps hundreds and thousands and millions and billions of people in poverty, and that until such time as that huge world structuring system changes, we're not actually going to get out of that particular situation. We're just not. So there is that thing called patriarchy, which is bound up with capitalism, certainly, and there is of course homophobia, transphobia, there is racism, that sort of understanding those complexities. But I think we do have to look at neoliberal capitalism. We do have to fight it. We do have to keep making that point.
And if I may add to this, key message, and that's from the whole conference and very much from this movement panel, is we're putting the status quo on notice. We're here to make things happen. We stand together, we speak together, we make change together, and we will vote with our ballots and our wallets to make that change happen.
So the other two
On the
questions-
next,
Yeah,
I
the
would
next-
say, let's continue the liaison between the different movements
Yes, yes.
and old movements, new movements, coming movements, because we are walking in the same direction towards that gender equal world. On the trolling and pulling her down,
Yes.
I would like to add that the G7 this year, I'm on the advisory group to President Macron, and the G7 will be coming out with a big initiative around making it much easier to block online trolling. They're going to use some of the same surveillance as they have used to terrorism on online harassment and make it very much easier to shut down. That doesn't take the offline away, but that is because a lot of the trolling today you see, and it's a democratic problem. You know, women get pulled down, women get attacked, starts online, manifest physically, but that's a good step ahead of that. On the how do we communicate the complex, including the gag rule, the combination of evidence, data, and stories with concrete suggestions to action that different sectors can take, for us as Women Deliver advocates, has been a tremendously effective bouquet. Because sometimes you put the rights argument first, sometimes it's the economic argument, sometimes it's the voices and the stories. But yes, we need to move the hearts and the heads to activate the hands.
The stories piece you just mentioned, I think, is, especially on something like global gag, is pretty important, because global gag is like it's become it's a catchphrase, it's a sort of people understand it and shorthand for complex policy. But you're right, your average listener that you have, doesn't understand it. But I think if you were to tell a story of an aid worker, right, who is confronted with a situation that is pretty complicated, for an individual woman in front of that person, and their inability to even advise the person, right, on the choices that they have, and then the implications for that family when that happens, whether it's someone who has a complicated pregnancy who can't terminate it, and now she's actually seriously physically compromised. I mean, those are, which many of the activists here in Women Deliver who are in country and doing that work can provide you, I think is the best way to illustrate that to the casual listening public.
Well, and just a little piece of good news from Ireland on that our the latest policy paper from our Department of Foreign Affairs, which, is small. Ireland is very tiny, but they one of their top key priority is actually gender equality, and within that, they don't, there's no gag rule there. It's part of our the prohibition against abortion is out of our constitution, so it's just simply part of our legal and health system that women can access it free, universal free healthcare. So that doesn't apply. So there are very many areas where countries in which there is not a gag rule. Yeah. And I think that that's also very important. And there is a lot of contact and connection between of workers in the different international organizations. I'm always so impressed by that. There's very strong relationships. So if she can't say it, maybe he can. You know, but we have to crack that, of course.
Any more questions? Else, I think we will be wrapping up. I'm getting the signal of wrapping up. What's going on? So, but thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
What
Katja,
a great morning.
Well, thank you for a great
Yes.
conference.
Yeah.
I mean, this
Thank
woman
you.
deserves all the credit here.